It was a cold, foggy morning in the quiet village of Blackwood. The kind of morning where the air felt heavy, and the silence was broken only by the occasional caw of a crow. Detective Arthur Lane adjusted his coat and stepped out of his car, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. The village pond, known locally as the Drowning Pool, had always been a place of eerie beauty. But today, it was a crime scene. The body of a young woman lay on the muddy bank, her pale face half submerged in the water. Her name was Clara Bennett, a 24-year-old artist who had recently moved to the village. She was known for her vibrant paintings and her love for nature. But now, her lifeless body told a different story. Detective Lane knelt beside the body, examining the scene. There were no obvious signs of struggle, no bruises or wounds. Her clothes were intact, and her bag lay a few feet away, untouched. It was as if she had simply walked into the pond and drowned. But Lane knew better. Clara Bennett didn't strike him as the type to take her own life. The villagers had already started whispering. The Drowning Pool had a dark history. Decades ago, a young woman had drowned under mysterious circumstances, and since then, the pond had been shrouded in superstition. Some claimed to have seen a ghostly figure near the water at night, while others spoke of strange ripples appearing even on windless days. Lane, however, was a man of logic. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He believed in evidence. And as he looked around, he noticed something unusual. A single set of footprints led to the water's edge, but there were none leading away. It was as if Clara had vanished after stepping into the pond. He turned to the village constable, a nervous man named Tom Wilkins. "Who found the body?" Lane asked. "It was old Mr. Hargrove," Wilkins replied. "He was out for his morning walk when he saw her floating near the edge. He called us right away." Lane nodded. "I'll need to speak with him. And I want a list of everyone who knew Clara Bennett. Friends, family, anyone she might have interacted with recently." As the day went on, Lane began piecing together Clara's life. She had moved to Blackwood 6 months ago, renting a small cottage on the outskirts of the village. She kept to herself, spending most of her time painting or walking in the woods. But she had made a few friends, including a local shopkeeper named Margaret and a farmer named James. Lane's first stop was Margaret's shop. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and Margaret looked up from behind the counter. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, but today they were filled with sadness. "Detective," she said softly, "I heard about Clara. It's just awful." Lane nodded. "I understand you were friends with her. Can you tell me anything about her? Did she seem troubled lately? Was there anyone she might have been afraid of?" Margaret hesitated. Clara was a sweet girl, but she did seem distracted the last few weeks. She mentioned something about a secret she had discovered. Something about the pond. Lane's interest was piqued. "What kind of secret?" "I don't know," Margaret admitted. She didn't say much, but she seemed excited, like she had found something important. She even started painting the pond more often. Said had a story to tell. Lane thanked Margaret and made his way to James's farm. The farmer was a burly man with a weathered face, and he greeted Lane with a firm handshake. "Clara used to come here sometimes," James said. "She liked to paint the animals, but I didn't know her well. She was a quiet one." "Did she ever mention anything unusual?" Lane asked. James scratched his head. "Now that you mention it, she did ask me about the pond once. Wanted to know if I believed in the stories. I told her it was all nonsense, but she seemed fascinated." As Lane left the farm, he couldn't shake the feeling that Claire's death was connected to the pond. But how? And why? That evening, Lane decided to visit the drowning pool himself. The fog had thickened, and the water looked almost black in the fading light. He walked along the edge, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. And then he saw it, a small, weathered box, half buried in the mud. He opened it carefully, revealing a collection of old letters and photographs. The letters were addressed to a woman named Eliza, who had lived in the village over a century ago. They spoke of a forbidden love affair and a tragic end. Eliza had drowned in the pond, and her lover had disappeared soon after. As Lane read through the letters, he realized that Clara must have found this box. She had uncovered the truth about Eliza's death, and it had cost her her life. But who had killed her? And why? The answer came the next day, when Lane received a visit from Margaret. She looked pale and shaken. "Detective," she said, "I found something in Clara's cottage. It's a painting of the pond. But there's something strange about it." Lane followed her to the cottage, where the painting hung on the wall. At first glance, it was a beautiful depiction of the drowning pool. But as Lane looked closer, he noticed something in the water, a faint outline of a face. It was Eliza's face. Margaret gasped. Clara must have seen something. Something she wasn't supposed to. Lane's mind raced. Clara had discovered the truth about Eliza's death, and someone in the village had killed her to keep it hidden. But who? The final clue came from James. When Lane questioned him again, the farmer broke down and confessed. His family had been involved in Eliza's death all those years ago, and Clara's discovery had threatened to expose their dark secret. With James's confession, the case was closed. But as Lane stood by the drowning pool one last time, he couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. The water seemed to ripple, as if something or someone was still lurking beneath the surface. And in the distance, a faint whisper echoed through the fog. The drowning pool had claimed another victim.